apology. The basement is dry by morning. Thanks.
Thank you so much, everyone. That was Elizabeth Tannen. Next up, we have Greg Bird. Gregory Bird is the author of several books of poetry, including The Name for God Who Speaks. He is a Pushcart Prize nominee and a Fulbright Scholar. His poems and stories have appeared in journals such as the Baltimore Review, Puerto del Sol, Poeteca, and Appalachia Review. He's wonderful. Everyone welcome Gregory Bird.
Thank you. It says cannot start video because the host has stopped it. Okay, awesome. There we go. Cool. Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be in Willow Springs. It's a journal I've always wanted to appear in at some point. White on White is a short story. It's too long to read in this situation, but I'm going to read the first paragraph or so, which kind of sets the setting. It's about a high school graduate getting ready to go off to college, working with an older man, and both of their attitudes towards women. And the high school graduate has a rather innocent romantic approach to the girl that he's interested in, while the older guy, who's a merchant seaman, has rather a crude approach to some of the women, except for his girlfriend. And then the way the story ends up is by focusing on a scene that they see that kind of changes both of their approaches. White on White. Summers, I went on furlough for my job bagging groceries and filling the beer cooler at the Key Largo Shopper to work in my dad's appliance store. The place had 2 stories, with the repair shop and the warehouse on top and the showroom and offices down below. I spent a lot of time upstairs in the summer heat and bare concrete block walls, stacking boxed refrigerators and air conditioners, or pulling the newly bought appliances and sending them down on the lift. The last summer, before I went off to college, I stood 6 feet tall and weighed only 120 pounds, but I was strong from running track. And they have some different experiences and get to know each other a little bit. And the last delivery that they make is to a woman further south. This is after Jimmy's girlfriend has left him too. Jimmy and I spent over half that Friday rearranging the warehouse, pulling old stock and putting it in the showroom, or rotating it to the top stacks and in front of the rows so that it would sell soonest. It was the worst job, except for tarring the parking lot, which I did one summer. So we hoped there would always be just enough work to keep us busy with deliveries. Of course, long trips to Lower Matacumbe or even Marathon were best because they consisted of a good hour of driving one way across bridges and little work. After lunch, Mom told us we were to haul a rusty old Kenmore fridge down to Tavernier. I remembered this one because I had cleaned it out with bleach and water in the parking lot after it had been traded in on a new one. The racks were a bit oxidized inside, and rust had broken out in a scattered pox along the sides. It worked, sure, but was nothing to look at. The invoice even reflected that, $30, which seemed a made-up price, perhaps to get rid of the thing. Jimmy and I figured it would go in someone's garage. When we pulled into the white gravel yard at 243 Indian Avenue, a young woman came out and waved us down. The house was one of those older block houses built when they were worried about hurricanes, so there was a lot of poured concrete around the doors and windows. Through the open door, we could see her kid eating his soup at the little dining table. The lady, in a pair of cutoffs and t-shirt, didn't seem to be any older than Jimmy. "This is the old one," she said. "It done quit on us last night, and I told my Bob we needed a new fridge, and he said, where the hell are we going to get a new fridge?" She flipped a bit of stray gray blonde hair from her face. She was sweating in the heat, as were we. The windows to her house were all open, and the soft ocean breeze made it bearable if you weren't doing too much. It looked like she'd been hanging laundry, men's work shirts and diapers, and she left the laundry basket outside to feed her kid and wait on us. I opened the fridge and pointed to the inside. It was clean and ready to go. There was no reason to clean a broken fridge, but the lady had done it. We hauled it out, and the lady set to with the broom and wash rag to clean the floor where the fridge had been. We had to take the working fridge off the truck before we could put the old one on. As he lowered the working one onto the left, Jimmy said to me, "She ain't got much, has she?" I shook my head, but the linoleum on the kitchen floor was clean, and the house was open and honest, and the little kid seemed happy as he ate his soup and anticipated his nap. I made sure the door was all the way open, and Jimmy wheeled the new fridge into place and plugged it in. The compressor made its customary click, and the fan underneath whirred to life. The lady sighed and smiled. I held the clipboard with the invoice. "It says paid here, Mrs. Harris, so all I need is your signature to show it was delivered." She took the pen with the name of the store on it and signed the form. I gave her the top copy. Eddie was already loading the old fridge and strapping it down. "All set, Eddie." Mrs. Harris came out with 2 glasses of water with ice in them. "I wish I could give you all a good tip, but all I can offer you is some ice water." The ice must have come from a cooler we didn't see. There, in front of the white house, in the white gravel yard, next to the white truck with the white fridge in it, and the white laundry flying against a blue sky, we drank. The water was cool and pure, and the ice chimed against the glass and bumped our lips. In that one bright moment, we couldn't imagine anything better. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was Greg Bird, everybody. Lovely story. I love that ending. Just a reminder for everyone here that we do have a Q&A function here on the Zoom here. So if you do have any questions for the authors, we will be having a Q&A afterwards, so feel free to post those. Next up, we have Erin Donovan. Erin Donovan is an associate with the Virginia Center for the Book. She holds an MFA in creative writing from the University of Arkansas and an MA in Italian from Middlebury College. Her poetry has appeared in Rhino, New Ohio Review, Southern Poetry Review. Everyone, please welcome Erin Donovan.
Thanks so much, Forrest. So excited to be a part of this reading and to hear my fellow contributors read the work that I've read in the Sexy Goat issue. So I'll read my poem from this issue and then 2 other slightly newer poems. So, After a Rain. This puddle by the house blossoms with black squirming bodies. Not leeches, as I guess at first, but the mutable forms of fresh-born frogs that bolt and twist from the pass of my shadow over their shallow haunt, this short spit gouged out of the lawn by tires, pressing for purchase. In this city, any depression, any lull, fills with water. It rises from crosswalks, spills past catch basins, flows out canals, and streams over our cars. You can't keep what floods. I could have told these captive tadpoles there's no house here, no permanent residence possible, where every surface subsides, but the argument's inaudible underwater. And then two from a recent series of love poems, as you'll be able to see from the titles. Love poem with no internal monologue. You know, some people have no inner voice talking. They're not busy always with this back and forth about, am I hungry yet? And what was that noise? Marveling at the neighbor whose cat paces him on walks around the yard, wondering how he manages its black and white orbit about him. People who, not having to forever arrange and rebuild the blocks of a conversation, rephrase an exchange to say with, please, the right amount of need, let me come over. They must have some range of calm I can't imagine. And because my thoughts are always weaving some wordy ecliptic about me, I have to articulate that state and say, I'd guess it's like these hills along I-64, lit in winter gold, a late afternoon landscape on my way to you when the view opens suddenly to nothing but these plots of unplanned earth, seeded with wild grasses, weeds between fence posts, stands of pine where light finds them. And last one, thanks again for having me. Very excited to hear everyone read. Love poem with Io and Europa. I'll take advice from anyone who can tell me what I want to hear. Stars, planets, the mute moon waxed full must want to weigh in on what's happening. I mean, I am hopeful you will draw me in and do something. This time last year, a man planted 3 telescopes in the bayou's flat grass for the Great Conjunction. 6 centuries since the bright eye of Jupiter had passed so near to Saturn. I moved lens to lens, looking from white cold hoops to vivid moons, as the pink December sunset fell through live oaks and the two set suddenly into city lights, the hiss of them extinguishing. From those stark views, our small group of new stargazers staggered back to winter rooms, far bodies another 20 years from being this close. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. That was Erin Donovan. I love not only hearing the work that we've published from everybody, but I also love hearing new things. It's the best part. Next up, we have Jason Graf. Jason Graf holds an MFA from Goddard College. His debut novel, Stray Our Pieces, was published by Waldorf Press in 2019, and a second novel, Heckler, by Unsolicited Press in 2020. His short fiction has been published by Fiction Southeast, Shadowgraph magazine. Everyone, please welcome Jason Graf.
Thank you, Forrest, and I have to say how honored I am to be among these other writers tonight. I'm just going to read the first little section of my story that appeared in issue 90. It's called Voluntary Reader. In the hospice where Shelley works, a dead person's balloons are up for grabs if left unclaimed. When she brings one home, I know better than to ask how her day was. Our 4-year-old daughter, Deidre, is obsessed with balloons and never lets us throw any out until they're completely deflated. I hope her obsession with balloons ends before she starts getting as curious about where they come from as she is about the rest of the world. When the time comes, Shelley will probably just tell her the truth, and then we'll have to explain death to her. Fortunately, I've been preparing myself for this since she was born and think I have a pretty good explanation ready. I even wrote some of it down. I'm nothing special when it comes to writing. Ask my dad, he'll tell you. I don't read enough to be a writer, apparently. Those people, he once assured me, meaning anyone who writes anything for a living, it's all they do with their free time. They never watch TV or check the basketball scores on their phone or go for a run or bake chocolate chip cookies. His overall opinion of my abilities meant that he was well satisfied with the job I got after college. The one I still have years and years later, years of promising myself I'll find something else to do. Technology will always be around, he predicted. It was something solid, which was the most important quality for anything or anyone to have, according to him. One day I get a ticket for a job in Professor Jorgensen's office. All of us in tech support hate going to professors' offices. There's always the danger of being buried by an avalanche of books almost no one else has ever read. Still, not many of us would have a job if it weren't for the 3/4 of the erudite faculty who can barely turn on their computers. Professor Jorgensen's neater than most. She has a lot of books, but they all have their place on a shelf or on the windowsill behind her desk. I shut her computer down and wait a minute to turn it back on because it tends to make people think I know what I'm doing. 3 piles of paper lean into one another on the floor behind her desk, like she's trying to hide her mess, which I appreciate. The 3 stacks are each at least a foot high, with the largest coming up to my knee. I tried to get out of it last year by telling Dr. Kearns I couldn't read off a screen anymore, and he informed me I could just print them out and read them, despite the cutback, she says, turning the first paper in each of the piles over. He said I was redundancy. I told him it was exactly how I felt. Professor Jorgensen has been the editor of the school's literary magazine for 6 years. She loved it at first, but lately finds it takes too much time away from her own writing and other academic pursuits, which she was kind enough not to bore me with. Submissions go up every year, but the general quality of those submissions remains more or less the same. With the amount of time and work the magazine demands, she's wondered if she can even call herself a writer anymore, since now she spends the bulk of her time editing. She excuses herself to get some coffee, asking me if I want any as a bridge too far, even for the most decent of the tenured. I crouched down to read one of the stories and see how long it would take for me to tell if it were the writer had read enough to please my dad. The opening sentence is full of metaphors that, in stretching for the sublime, often extend themselves beyond the point of making sense. Also, and this just may be a personal preference, but I don't think anything ever needs to be described as avocado, not even avocados themselves. Green will do, green and move on. I'm still crouching, hoping the story will move closer to actual substance when she comes back. Hardly the first time I've been caught doing something other than fixing a computer. I stand and move the mouse around as though it might have been the problem all along. She asked me what I thought about what I'd read. I feel as though I can't lie. It's overwritten, I say, hoping it'll be the end of it. She nods, bends down behind me and reads it over, then places it on the biggest stack. Avocado, she says with a wince. When she asks if I have any interest in helping out with the slush pile by signing up to be a first reader, I jump at the chance. My whole return commute, I can barely think. I'm so excited to tell Shelley about it. But I have to deal with a disaster when I get Deidre home from daycare. All of the balloons lay in a crumpled mylar and rubber puddle in the corner, as though they'd all expired at once. Flummoxed beyond her usual steely resolve, Dee didn't even cry at first. She picks up each one and examines it, looking for holes. I have no story ready. I just hold her and hope Shelley will come home soon to offer scientifically based rationale for why it happened. I read my batches of stories at work in between job tickets. The imprecise metaphors bother me less the more I read, but this also means, I suspect, the good ones are losing their impact. The sheer volume has a numbing effect. No matter the writer or the genre, each story bothers me in a similar way. Adverbs serving their verb masters poorly, making clear stronger verbs are what's needed. Suddenly, quickly, or before she knew what she was doing. Things might well and very often do happen in such a way in real life, but fiction should enhance, not imitate. The mundane chaos of the universe isn't something fiction should try to give form to. Stories shouldn't try to mark time this way. They shouldn't mark time at all. The only relationship readers really have with time is when they feel theirs is being wasted. Maybe that's what all this imprecision's in aid of.
Thank you so much, everyone. That was Jason Graf. Next up, we have Melissa Stutter. Melissa Stutter received her MFA from Sarah Lawrence College and is a professor in the Lone Star College system. She's the author of 5 books, including I Ate the Cosmos for Breakfast. Her work has been featured by NPR, the New England Review, Poetry Magazine. Everyone, please welcome Melissa Stutter.
Thank you, Forrest and Polly and the rest of the editors. And I'm very excited to be here with my issue mates and everybody who's reading and here in attendance. I'm going to read my first poem from my new book, Dear Selection Committee, and it's called To Be With Trees. I think the only thing that you really need to know to understand the poem is that about, most of the way through towards the end, I'll say, God loves your eyes because they made them this beautiful color. And it's all one word. That's why I read it really fast and smushed together. So to be with trees. I dreamed of trees with blue veins in a forest full of wilting. And there, all my Southern girl self, full of no thank yous, full of you first, and go ahead and have the last piece of cake. I want that last piece of cake. Dreamed the trees made me my own tort, and I could have the whole thing. My sisters, the trees, they said, come now, sit, eat. They had blue veins in the forest full of wilting, and I cried. There were no forks. They said my hands were fork enough. And when I tried to say please, the trees said my eyes were please, and they said my mouth was thank you, and the trees cried too. They had beautiful eyes for crying, a color I had never seen. So I named it, God loves your eyes because they made them this beautiful color. Now, anyone who saw the color would think of the trees and the meaning of the trees, which was to be. And the next poem I'm going to read is from this Sexy Goat issue. I love it. And I love goats. I also love lizards, which will feature in this poem. I think that the thing that I'd kind of like for you to know is that I wrote this poem at a writing residency. And while I was at the residency, I was climbing a lot of trees because I love trees. So it was pretty common for people to see me like jumping out of a tree or calling down, hey, below, from up in the tree. And I was just completely infatuated with the iguanas and lizards and everything that were around. So one night we, I think it was like the last night there, we got really festive with the wine and I got really silly and I was pressing olives into the hummus and everybody kept asking me why I was doing that. And I just was coy and didn't answer. And so I wrote this poem about why I was doing it. It's called Bedazzling the Hummus. Contrary to popular belief, God does not want us to be boring. So I press olives into the bottom of the hummus for the others to find later. I kiss my own arm at dinner and then spill across the dance floor, which it turns out is really just a tangle of trunks and roots that are not very good at keeping people from falling. At night, I try to astral project to my absent lover from the shoreline. I adore walking outside myself as if I were the renegade hem of a dress tickling the back of the universe's thigh. Later, I find my body in the sand like the pearlescent shell of some lost creature and climb back in. I feel guilty, but I have to admit I'm cheating on my significant other with at least 5 different lizards, if it's true that emotional affairs are a real thing. My friend Joseph says it's okay because Jesus is still at large and doing his shit, which means I will be forgiven for not being able to resist the magnificent punch-colored throats of horny chameleons. Seriously, everything I've ever done wrong has been from either too much love or too much wine or both. So in the morning, I try to make amends, promise moderation, apologize to all the reptiles I've objectified. Maybe later, I'll give you a studio tour of this ridiculous art, my life, which is also a prolonged embrace, which is also my way of saying, hey, God, I feel ya. My way of saying, hey, friend, I want to give you the world. Be sure to check the bottom of the hummus. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That is such a lovely poem. That was Melissa Stutter, everyone.
Thank you.
Next, we have Denver Butson. Denver's 5th book of poems, The Scarecrow Alibis, is the winner of the 2022 Vern Rutzala Poetry Prize and just published a couple of days ago from Cloudbank Books. We are really happy to have published the first of these Scarecrow poems back in 2013 in Willow Springs Magazine, and we are delighted to complete the circle here. In 2020, Denver won the William Matthews Poetry Prize, judged by Elliot Kaminsky, and he wrote the afterword for Jim Harrison's posthumous collected ghazals for Copper Canyon Press. Everyone, please welcome Denver Butson. You are muted there.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me, Polly and Forrest. And yes, I did have I think 6 poems in an issue about the Scarecrow in 2013, and then one just recently in the Goat issue. I'm going to read one poem from one of the first ones that was in the issue in 2013. That's in my new book, The Scarecrow Alibis. And I'll read the one that's in the new Goat issue, and then I'll read a poem from the book that's not in Willow Springs. This is called If the Scarecrow Weren't a Scarecrow. If the Scarecrow weren't a scarecrow, he might be a strolling violinist who appears at your table and waits for you to fall in love with your wife again, or to wave him off anyway with a dollar bill. Or he might be a ship's captain standing on the bow of his ship, looking out across the water, looking toward a place he once thought of as home. The Scarecrow might be a glass of water in a thirsty man's hand, or a set of keys to an ex-lover's apartment, keys you don't know if you'll ever have the emotional strength to remove from the hook inside your door. If the Scarecrow weren't a scarecrow, he might know a lot about oceans, or how to swim across oceans. He might be a little boy running up to the waves and then away, up to the waves and then away. If the Scarecrow weren't a scarecrow, he might pass a scarecrow from a car on some back road and barely notice the scarecrow out there, looking almost like a falling down man. Or if he does notice, he might wonder for a moment what it must be like to stand that still, and then switch the radio station and start singing along, having completely forgotten about that scarecrow back there before the chorus, before more than a couple miles have even gone by. If the Scarecrow weren't a scarecrow, he might be you, or he might be me, or he might just be someone else who is neither you nor me, someone perhaps who doesn't even know that he or she is not a scarecrow and never was one, perhaps at all, who does not feel the pang of not being who he or she might have been, as you and I and the Scarecrow himself feel such a pang every time we consider how things and we might have been different. The next poem I'm going to read is not in Willow Springs, and then I'll finish with the one that's in the current issue. This is called Knowledge. Knowledge. The Scarecrow is well aware that the most accurate word for the color of a mockingbird's wings is gunpowder. He knows that the moon never sweeps up the messes she makes until right before the sun comes home from a long day on the other side of the earth. The Scarecrow knows you will eventually leave me, you with your nightmares of running away from something you can't see and your eyes like clenched fists. But the Scarecrow doesn't know much of anything else. He doesn't know where the highway goes. He doesn't know what it's like to hear an AM radio station in the middle of the night from a town he's never been to before. Scarecrows may know about train wrecks and the silence of the sky after train wrecks, but this Scarecrow does not know that your lips taste like the silence of that sky, and he'll never know what it's like not to taste them after tasting them for so long. The Scarecrow may know how to scare crows. He may know the gunpowder wings of mockingbirds, but he'll never know the mockingbird gray of memory, like gunpowder residue on our palms after we throw everything up to the sky, as if it and we could fly. And then this is from the latest issue of Willow Springs. It's called Rumors. Almost all of what you have heard about the Scarecrow is untrue. He is not an ornithologist, though his focus on birds has given him a great understanding of what birds are and are not afraid of. The Scarecrow has not been beheaded. His head is not on a spike about to be carried into the town square by a flock of angry farmers. He is not in love with the farmer's wife, nor is he lain with her. He is not even certain that he knows what love is or what it means to lie with another, though it is not completely untrue that he has dreamt of doing just that, and yes, with the farmer's wife. And it is not untrue that these dreams have left him unsettled and with a hunger that he had never felt before. If it must be said, the Scarecrow is not the repository for your inadequacies. His stillness has nothing to do with your inability to act when you know that you must act. The Scarecrow is not a symbol of your not acting, any more than you are a symbol of scarecrowness when you stand still. The Scarecrow is not coming up behind you right now, about to tap you on the shoulder, to ask you directions to the nearest bar with a halfway decent jukebox. But you should look over your shoulder, just in case I'm wrong about any of this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. That was Denver Busson. Finally, in our lineup, but certainly not leastly, we have Lauren Osborne. Lauren Osborne received an MFA in fiction writing from Queen's University of Charlotte and is currently working towards a PhD in English and creative writing at Oklahoma State University. Her work has appeared in the Laurel Review, the North American Review, and the Cincinnati Review's micro-series. She lives in Stillwater, Oklahoma, with her collection of arachnids and other creatures, and I'm sure that will be relevant. Everyone, please welcome Lauren Osborne.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here, and today I'll be reading my short story, Gossamer Girl, which is relevant to spiders. Gossamer Girl. Once there was a girl, but she wasn't a girl. She was a spider. But she wasn't a singular spider. She was 1,000. Tiny, spindly legs tucked and tangled, clustered eyes dancing, twinkling, bodies nestled in silk cocoon, hidden beneath the disguise of a girl, with a slick black ponytail and 10 fingers and 10 toes, and a dotted freckle just beneath her left eye. Once, there was a girl spider cluster who wanted to find love. But being made of spiders made lovemaking difficult. Men, in her experience, even the ones who claimed to be fearless, were scared of anything smaller than they were, scared of anything unknown or unknowable. Plus, when she peeled back her soft skin to reveal a writhing mass of arachnids, she couldn't quite understand where a vagina was supposed to be, or how deep a burrow to make inside herself, or where hands were supposed to grab or hold or squeeze, if not for her breast, which were also spiders, who did not want to be pinched in any case. The cluster spider girl did not like the idea of letting another invade her, redefine her as anything other than what she was, a multitude of miracles. So she found things to love that weren't men, such as the way the night slipped down across the horizon and turned the sky inky black, or the way small bugs would skitter from hiding corners and tickle her tongue during dinner, or the way silk webs wrapped softly around her feet at night. Once, the cluster girl spider met someone. He was tall and thin and reminded her of the best tree branches, and his eyes were the ochre of grasshopper guts, and his teeth so much like smooth sea pebbles. Hey, he said, admiring the way her fingers worked a skein of yarn as she was knitting on a park bench, looking as if she were wondering if it would be considered rude to molt in public. She looked up, fingers missing a loop and tangling the thread. He didn't notice as one of the spiders crawled out from her blouse and quickly untangled the knot with practiced pedipalps. Hey, she said, and the spiders which worked her tongue, creating the perfect pitch, the A as soft as breath. The man asked her for coffee because she looked so lonely and so beautiful. So she said yes, and he didn't even question why she didn't drink her skim milk latte or touch her scone, which was too warm and smelled of artificial vanilla, too sweet. The spiders who occupied her brain whispered worries about the way his eyes never met their own, and how something with his smile was off, and why he never asked questions about herself, but rather focused the conversation on his job as a part-time bartender on the South Side, and the string of ex-girlfriends he left behind in Philly, and his preference of ankle socks over midcalf, not on him, but on her, of course. But the spiders crowding her heart space gossiped about true love and nights spent caressing warm lips, and where they would lay their collection of eggs as abundant and fragile as froths of sea foam. The girl cluster spider gave him directions to her apartment, which was modest and dim and smelled like cobwebs, cedar-scented candles, and expensive perfume. He commented on her collection of crickets housed in glass terrariums, which she explained was for a science experiment about the benefits of ambient noise indoors and not a key ingredient in her morning smoothies. He said, and left it at that. He was all too quick to kiss her, lead her into her bedroom, tug at the skin which covered thousands of legs and eyes and spinnerets nervously spinning their sticky web in her stomach. The spiders whose job it was to make the lips weren't happy with the way he bit down on their cephalothoraxes, and the tongue spiders were less than pleased with being slicked with spit. Stop, she said. He ripped at her blouse, which she knitted herself from proteins consumed and recycled and remade, and toppled her onto the bed. Stop, she said. He wasn't dissuaded by the lack of opening between her legs or the few spiders that rushed to escape the holes of her ears in fear of what might come next. Stop, she said. But he didn't. He wouldn't. He tore away her skin and pressed his fingers into the cloud of trichothorbia and wispy web. In fairness, the bravest of the bunch threw their legs into a threat posture, swaying back and forth, showcasing fangs meant for cleaning and catching, and anything but this. He laughed, mumbling something about how beautiful it was, that even their threats looked so much like dancing. The spider girl cluster didn't want to force herself into the man's lungs. They didn't want to occupy whatever filth hid between his flesh and sinew, muscle and bone. They didn't want to eat him, but otherwise, he might have gone to waste. The cluster spider girl closed their eyes and thought of anything other than what was happening. They thought of warm beds wrapped with gossamer and dew, not of the gooey wet behind his eyes, of nights weaving stories from threads, not of the tangle of his unwashed hair, of drinking together with their millions of sisters, not of how warm his blood tasted, bitter iron and butter, then before coagulating into jelly. Thank you so much.
That story is just so wonderful. I love it every time. Thank you so much. And now we'd love to ask all of our attendees here to turn your videos back on and perhaps your microphones, and we're gonna just have a little Q&A session / chat / whatever we want. I don't have any questions from the Q&A part here, but if anybody has any just comments or anything to start us off, you're welcome to. Polly, I think you had a thing or two you talked about beforehand, but just thank you so much, everyone, for coming and for reading for us, and just lovely to see all of you in one place, besides in the book.
So you guys can put your questions in the Q&A or in the chat. Either one is fine. Oren put a test question in. And we'll check to see if anybody on anybody's up on the YouTube with any questions. Well, I have a question for Denver about because we also published the knife thrower poems, and I'm just curious, and they have a distinctly different voice, and I just wonder if you would address the difference between them and maybe talk about, what time frame, how far apart they were written, and what the knife thrower poems, where they're headed.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, the Scarecrow came to me in 2011 as basically a one-off poem. That's what I thought it was, and it turned out to be like maybe 400 poems about the Scarecrow, much more than what's in my book. and they're still coming, and they're still there. But at some point during the pandemic, I had written these study guides that are part of the Scarecrow book. They're study guides that are kind of some facts, some made up things, some completely bizarre tidbits about the Scarecrow. And so I liked that format, and I liked what was happening with it. And I just thought I'm going to move away from the Scarecrow for a little bit. And I found this knife thrower, and it's taken on a life of its own. There's a character who appears in a character. It's weird to talk about in a book of poems, but there's a person who appears in one of the early poems named Louise, who's she's a target girl, which is the people who stand still for knife throwers. But she's really the best knife thrower in the world, but she can't be a knife thrower because it's a man's world at that time, and they're all secretly jealous of her, and she ends up becoming a main figure in the whole thing. But this is all pandemic stuff that's still happening now.
I think that's really interesting because my sense of those knife thrower poems is that they had a sort of timeliness. They felt really in the moment, and so it doesn't surprise me that they were generated during the height of the pandemic.
Yeah, it was definitely there's definitely a loneliness about them, and an isolated thing about them. I don't know where they're going at this point. There's a couple hundred pages right now of stuff. It just keeps building up, and I don't know what's going to happen.
Wonderful. Thank you. We've got a question here for Elizabeth from our current poetry editor, Oran, who says, first and foremost, your poems are wonderful. Thank you for writing, publishing, and reading them. Secondly, congratulations on your new child. I'd like to ask if you have any plans to make a book or chapbook that might hold these full series of pregnancy poems in the future.
That's so sweet. Thanks for making me feel better about staying up late. I have like a manuscript like worth of poems from that time, but I just have to summon the stamina to go through them because a lot of them are not good. So I hope to make them better and spend more time with that manuscript so that I can feel good about sending it out. And I'll just say it's kind of funny to me. I felt really generative in poetry when I was pregnant, and then since my son's been born, I've except for with that one poem that surfaced last week, I've written like one other poem since he's been born. It's been almost entirely essays that I felt interested in writing. So I just think it's kind of funny that a potential life is like more interesting in some ways, or more generative, at least in terms of poetry, than an actual child. Everyone's like, oh, you're just so tired, you don't have time to write. And it's like, no, I'm writing. It's not really poetry for whatever reason. Anyway, thanks for that tender question.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm sure Aran would be delighted. We've got a couple questions.
Quickly,
sorry, go.
I also have a very like visceral high school attachment to Liz Phair, so
yes.
much appreciated that. Yeah.
Thank you. Let's talk offline about it.
That's the best part of these, is we get to see those connections that we wouldn't have seen otherwise. We've got a couple questions for Lauren here. One from Jennifer, our current fiction editor, and one from me, if I can be greedy and ask a question myself. Jennifer's question is, I love how you balance collective and individual embodiment in Gossamer Girl. Could you share with us how you developed this aspect of the main character, perhaps from naming her/them to describing the experience? Anything you want to say about that?
Thank you so much for your question. Yeah, I just really like the idea of things hiding beneath skin. I think of something disguising itself as a person. It's kind of horrific, but I'm really into sympathetic monsters. And so I did want to make a sympathetic character. The collective aspect of the cluster girl spider mostly arose from me not sure what to call her in the story. I kind of started out with just like slashes, and then I thought they were interesting and they kind of worked. And with each new section, I tried to reorder them around. And yeah, just from not really knowing what to call a collection of arachnids wearing human skin, I don't think there's a really good name for that. And I also wanted to add in a lot of scientific terms for arachnids to sort of bolster that understanding. I know a lot of people don't like spiders, so it was interesting to try to work with an experience that people could relate to, but also kind of understand the feelings of being misunderstood. That would be another something that people could relate to. But yeah, that was mostly my process in that. Thank you.
Awesome. And I'd like to jump in with my question here. And it's one of the reasons I initially fell in love with your story is that love the kind of archetypes of the fairy tales. And this is one I think that we don't often see in the West of the vagina dentata category of fairy tale. And I was wondering if that was something that like an idea that you had thought of intentionally, or if you have a idea about that at all. Just because I really love seeing stuff like that. We don't see it a lot in the West necessarily.
Right. That wasn't something I was initially thinking of when I was writing it. But I think somewhere like in my subconscious, I was definitely knew about it and sort of knew about those fairy tales. But yeah, I do like to write a lot of kind of bent, interesting, remade fairy tales and works. Yes, thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you. Let's see here. We have a question that was from Greg, but I think to everybody potentially, of just the idea that I know he said we kicked around his story for a while. We went back and forth. We went back and forth on the title. We went back and forth on these little pieces here and there, and it sat around for a while, and everybody is looking at this like I like it, but I think what he was saying is that it might have helped make that acceptance a little bit brighter. And I think if I'm understanding this question correctly, I was curious if you guys have any thoughts about this, any of your pieces perhaps that have gone through the long journey of publication history and what that has potentially meant to you.
Well, I can speak to that right away. I think that what you just said at the end, and we've all been through it, that long process of especially a story, but also, I just before this reading, I came from a poetry meeting, and the question of like what goes on inside those meetings. And I can say the biggest thing that goes on is hold. And, I think every author up here, we held and held and held and held. And it's just, it's a matter of you read so much that when you find something that has a glimmer or excites you one time and you read it the next time and it doesn't excite you as much. And then the next time you read it, you love it more than you loved anything. And we all kind of go through that process, and it's pretty fascinating. And we do talk about, what would make this a stronger piece. So I think it's pretty amazing, and it's nice for us to see, to think about our own work going out there and those conversations that might be being had at some unknown table or in this case, Zoom room. So yeah, that would be my answer is the hold is really common, and the discussions are pretty deep and pretty thoughtful. I don't know if anybody else wants to talk about their experience of that on one side or the other.
Would any of the editors want to chime in? after in addition to you and Forrest?
Forrest, you'd have to give, if Jennifer wants to speak, you can give her speaking rights.
Okay, I can do that here. Let me find it.
Hello. My internet cut out, so I didn't actually hear the original question. I could tell it was a conversation about holding pieces, but I missed the initial question or how it came up.
Yeah, so what Greg wrote was, I know that Josh and Jennifer at least kicked my story around for about a year before accepting it. Would anyone like to talk about that? The experience made it even more meaningful that it was chosen.
Yeah, well, as someone who has submitted work myself, I know it's a very, very long time. And I think all of us that are in this game, we sort of try to, put it out of our minds when we submit something, but then it is on your mind. And, I'm really pleased that we were able to publish your piece and that you were pleased too. I think, one thing that I really appreciate about our process at Willow Springs is that every piece gets read twice. And we have an initial read by one of our student readers, and then it's read by a more experienced reader or an editor. And then the most promising pieces we do bring to these packet discussions that Polly mentioned. So, I think that we really spend a lot of time thinking about each piece, and that does, by its nature and also being on an academic calendar, lead to kind of a lengthy process sometimes. But, I am really glad that we just can spend that time on pieces. And then I don't know, Josh actually may be on, who was more directly involved with the editing for your piece, Greg. I don't know if Josh is here or not, but yeah, I think that's ideally something we can do collaboratively with the authors and come to an outcome that is satisfactory to you and to us. And I think in its ideal state, that's a collaborative process.
Yeah, I was thinking exactly that there's a collaboration between the writer and the editors that's kind of almost like an unseen collaboration in some ways. And I know there was I understand there was some discussion about there's some kind of ugly things that my character Eddie says about women, and that was one of those seemed to be one of the discussions that was going on, and and rightly so.
We do a lot of folks who've published fiction,
Yes.
in particular, know this. We do a lot of suggested edits, and usually they're suggested. We'll send an email and say, think about these things, but we generally accept them outright. And it's interesting that multiple people will be in on those edits. So anybody who has who's really hot for the story or really engaged in the story will send me edits, and then I'll go through all of those and my own and send the author those suggestions, which is what happened with yours. And it happens more with prose than with poetry, but we do occasionally make edits on poems as well.
Got a couple more questions here. We've got one from Chris. I'm going to butcher this last name. Theophanides. I'm so sorry. Really enjoyed these, and without having seen the issue yet, loved hearing these and not knowing initially what the genre was for a moment. To what extent do you all think cross-genre is? Do you all think of cross-genre in your approaches to what you're creating? That is, Lauren, poetry embedded within a short story, or Melissa, the unfolding of the poems, and what kinds of other mediums come into play in your decisions?
I guess I'll go first. I wasn't sure if Melissa should go first or not, but I'm really interested in the language, especially when I'm writing fiction. I think I'm more entranced with the way words sound together, as so much less so than the poetry within them. but I guess that is poetry in a way. I'm also really interested in the way research writing can come into play in fiction and other kinds of prose. I do a lot of research with entomology departments and do a lot of science writing. So I think that the seed of that is creative writing in a way. To tell a good story is to tell a good research story, to make it engaging. So all the time in the back of my mind, I'm thinking about language, what words I could push the limits of if they're too scientific, and how I could play that word off of other words. So yeah, thank you for that question.
Okay, I'm unmuted now. Yeah, that is a really good question. And I do write in different genres. And I think it does, at a certain point, there may even be a point where the thing that you're working with isn't sure yet what it wants to be. And then something takes over and emerges, and you realize, okay, this is a narrative poem or a lyric story or that kind of thing. But I think in the beginning, I don't like to worry too much about what it is. I like, and even with my students, I encourage them to start with free writing and then let the piece start to shape itself. So yeah, thanks for noticing that.
We have a follow-up question here for you, Melissa, actually, from Iran, a poetry editor, who says they love Bedazzling the Hummus. Lovely. The speaker's voice is so unique. And they asked, would you mind if I asked what your top 3 favorite lizards are?
Oh my gosh. Do you want to know like specific kinds of lizards or specific lizards?
However they are most meaningful to you, I imagine.
I absolutely love iguanas, first of all. And the place where I wrote this poem, there were iguanas running around everywhere. It was in Manasota Key, Florida, which was just like really hit by the hurricane, unfortunately. But I was actually bitten by an iguana in the where was it? In the Virgin Islands or something. And I was just trying to feed it. It was so sweet. It was just, trying to get it, it was like a puppy. It was trying to get the food before the other puppies got it, and it bit me. And I had to get like shots for salmonella and all this stuff. So I like to joke around that I'm lizard girl now. I really like this prehistoric DNA. So iguana is probably my top favorite. I also love those little geckos that like stick to windows and stuff with their little suction fingers, and just regular lizards too. I mean, I played with them all the time when I was a kid, and unfortunately found out about their tails coming off. And anyway, but yeah, those are my 3 favorites. My very favorite is the one that bit me.
That's so wonderful. Thank you. I think it's funny because we're completely probably opposite sides of the country, but I grew up chasing lizards all around the desert. Yeah, that's wonderful. I think that is most of the questions that we've gotten through the Q&A function here. So we'll wait to see if anybody else chimes in. We haven't gotten any questions on YouTube, but if any of you have any questions for any of each other or any of us, or this is the part of the reading party where we'd all kind of be chatting and maybe signing stuff or whatever. So just casual, how are you doing? And do you have anything that you'd like to know from each other?
We usually do it with a glass of wine in your hand, which makes it a little easier.
It sure does. Unfortunately, I haven't figured out the technology to pour it through the camera here.
All right. Well, I think that about finishes us out. Thank you, everybody, for showing up, and the magazine, of course, this beautiful issue is available on our website. And yeah, and if you're a writer, be sure to put something in the mail to us. Oh, sorry, put something in submittable to us. And thank you so much for coming. And if you want to chat with one another, you can certainly hang out on the webinar a little bit. We'll turn off the the live stream service. Oh, we got another question. Oh, Josh.
Yeah, just a comment from Josh.
Yeah, he says, I wanted to say regarding holding pieces that the back and forth of reading, rereading, and potentially editing a submissions is one of the most difficult and rewarding processes in publishing creative work. A good story has layers that just can't be fully appreciated in a few reads, and it feels like you can never see them all at once. As an editor, it's such a pleasure to hear readers' opinions and how they shift or solidify over time. It was a delight to discuss all the stories in the journal. So happy to hear you all read. Yeah, I couldn't second and third that. It's a really nice comment, Josh.
I just want to say this was a wonderful party. We've been to other parties, but this was just so full of affection, respect. And I want to thank you all, everyone who edited, everyone who hosted, and everyone who participated. I love this journal. I love reading it, and I love being in it, and hope to see you all there, and hope I'll find myself there too. Good night, everyone.
Night.
Thank you. Thanks, Joan. Love your poem.
Good night. Thank you. I so enjoyed hearing everyone's work tonight. It was wonderful.
Good night. Who was that?
It was Melissa.
Melissa.
Has anybody else had the experience of? Has anybody else had the experience of, as your work is being considered, and sometimes you get questions about it, that you actually learn more about your own work, about what that piece was intended to do? A lot of times I feel like I know pretty well what I'm up to, but there are certain pieces that I feel maybe I don't quite understand what I was doing in them. And then the questions kind of come to help me understand it a little bit more. Like this piece, I really understood, started to understand a progression of these two young men learning about women kind of in the abstract and coming up with their kind of puerile sort of ideas about them. And then by the end of the story, seeing something that allows them to really see an actual individual person rather than somebody who represents their own ideas of them. And I don't think I was quite that obviously aware that that's what was going on in the story until I started going back and forth and thinking more about that with the editors.
That's cool. I was thinking more for me, it's been more like editorial comments have been more helpful, especially in terms of craft. I know the Gettysburg Review, Mark Drew was the first story he accepted as the new editor, and he called me up and I said, I've been submitting to you for 10 years. And he's like, and he said, one thing, he said, we're going to take it, but I'd really like you to get rid of there's a mouse at the end that's sitting on a dead boy. And the story is called Horrible Stories About Mice. And he said, it's just too much. The mice throughout are great, but that mouse on the dead boy is just over the top. And it totally spoke to what my weak point, which is sort of getting overly dramatic or overdoing something that's working and to the point where it's no longer working. And so I shifted it to a paper bag that sounded like a mouse. And so that was super helpful. They also did something that the line editor was constantly not constantly, but a few times would take a sentence of mine and move it up a couple sentences. And I think a lot of fiction writers have this tendency, because I've seen it now in my own work and in other people's work, where you start to talk about something that the writer knows about, but the reader doesn't. And then you don't really illuminate it until a couple sentences later when you kind of figure it out. And so I've looked for that type of edit in my own work and in other people's work since that, getting those line edits back.
I'm curious, Greg, what for you in that exchange, the back and forth, like what kind of came to light for you that maybe you hadn't seen before?
I think there's, and maybe this is, I don't know, it kind of begs I think, a difficult question about craft, which is how much are you aware of as you're working on a story or a poem, and how much have you put into the piece without being totally conscious of it, but it may still work. And I think it was really just that progression. As I reread the story every time you guys would mention something, there was, I think there was something we changed a little bit where Eddie, who's, he's been a merchant seaman, and the character this was based on, he talked about his friends going into some port in Thailand or something, and as he said, going to get some of that chong pussy. And I thought that was such a raw, uncomfortable kind of thing, but it really captured that discomfort that a younger man, older boy would feel about something like that. And I was a little I wasn't quite sure. I thought it was a little bit over the top, but I wasn't sure. And so it made me look at that, and I agreed to change it. But I think as I reread the story, I was really able to see that the change in perspective of the characters about what their ideas were of women, and then what women actually were. I was able to see how that actually worked through and made some sense, which I wasn't really 100% conscious of. And I think also having women on the staff who were reading that story, I think made that even better, because then I was able to trust that somebody wasn't just reading over things. And Polly and I, who've worked together many years ago, as well, I was able to say, okay, if they like the story, there must be something in it that's it's not just sexism.
Yeah. And it's always hard to comment on something like that, because you want to keep the rawness, and yet you got to think about, is it over the top? Is this character clear without this? Is this everything that the reader is going to be looking at before they move on? And and so that, I think that's the important part about the idea of suggested edits. Like it's always this, this is worth thinking about or considering. And that's just the type of thing, that kind of rawness that can either work really well or be too much. And I don't think we're even a final judge of that. Well, should we call it a night?
I think that sounds good. Thank you all for sticking around as long as you have. Thank you for all you readers for reading. It was a pleasure to publish your work, to hear it today. Hopefully to do more in the future.
Thank you so very much. This was an honor, and so wonderful to hear everybody read. Thank you.
Talk to you soon, Polly, I hope.
Okay. Yeah, we should. It's been a while. Maybe we can Zoom sometime.
That sounds great.
We got a lot of catching up to do, for sure.
Yeah. Grading tons of papers, as I'm sure you are right now.
I'm on a bit of a
Oh, that's right. You're on leave. Yeah.
Partial.